Did I capture all the stories we wanted to talk about? I think I did.
I think yes. I didn't have anything to
Pop it
add
open.
to this list.
Come on, LinkedIn. Let's go. Yeah.
Paul, you also became quieter quite a bit.
Oh, can you hear me okay?
Yup.
Is that better?
What about the secure boot thing?
Oh, yeah. Can you pop a link in there?
Yeah, let me find that.
So,
I'm literally going to Google secure boot thing and hope
Yep.
that the thing I mean
This
comes
week.
up.
Hacking a Samsung TV. CVE news. FCC exemption for one vendor. And secure boot updates. Okay. You guys ready? Vlad, if you could just try and center yourself on your camera. Yes, perfect. Thank you.
Is that better?
Yes. Alrighty. Here we go. This week, hacking a Samsung TV, CVE news, an FCC exemption for one vendor, secure boot updates, all that and more. Stay tuned. Below the Surface, coming up next. Welcome to Below the Surface. This is episode number 72, being recorded on April 16th, 2026. I'm your host, Paul Asadorian, joined by Mr. Chase Snyder. Chase, welcome.
Hey, Paul. Hey, Vlad.
Sorry, I'm just adjusting my camera terribly, apparently. I should have done that before we started, but I didn't. Okay, I think that's better. Hey, and Vlad Babkin is here with us. Vlad, welcome.
Hello, guys.
Very excited for this episode. We got a lot of great stuff to talk about. Below the Surface listeners can learn more about Eclipsium by visiting eclipsium.com/go. There you'll find the ultimate guide to supply chain security, an on-demand webinar I presented called Unraveling Digital Supply Chain Threats and Risk, a paper on the relationship between ransomware and the supply chain, and a customer case study with DigitalOcean. If you're interested in seeing our product in action, you can sign up for a demo. All that at eclipsium.com/go. Where do you guys want to start today?
TV hacking?
TV hacking? Did they turn a
TV
TV into a router, Chase? Is that?
I don't.
Is that
It seems close. Seems pretty close.
they could have. They could have.
They could have done whatever they wanted. You know, we took a lot of flack for that video about the router ban. It just pulls together a lot of the threads. It really holds the room. There was the router ban. We had the video that was like, anything in your house you're with an RJ45 and a Wi-Fi interface, that's a router. People said no. The YouTube commenters said no, it's not that's not a router. It runs Linux. It has the network interfaces. It could be a router with like one command issued to the underlying Linux operating system.
Right.
And then Codex went ahead and did the thing. That's what happened, right? Is that they pointed the Codex threat, vulnerability discovery thingy at a Samsung TV, which I think the Samsungs all run Linux under the covers. There's like a split. There's some Samsung,
Is there like,
some Linux, some Android smart TVs.
Okay.
That's kind of the two.
Is Samsung Linux the Tizen? Is that what they call it?
Yeah, it's like
Tizen.
TV line that has the Linux underneath it. Yeah.
Yes. So the researchers made this blog post, Codex hacked a Samsung TV. They say that no TVs were seriously harmed during this research. One may have experienced mild distress from being repeatedly rebooted remotely by an AI, which I find hilarious, by the way. And anytime an article starts off like this, I'm like, we're in to buckle up. I think we're in for a wild ride.
Yeah. So, what I find interesting is that if you read into the article, they didn't quite go for, oh, hey, here is a TV that responds to this API. Oh, we have a shell, some browser tool, and here's how you use the shell, and we want you to escape into the root shell. So, given how like what I have in my experience with AI so far, AI is really good at exploring shells, exploring source
Yes.
file, exploring like gray box style testing. If you throw it at a black box thing, it will probably not do really well. But if you throw it at gray box where it has whatever information you have, it has a shell, it has a device to work with, usually AI actually performs great at those tasks. So like this is what we got with like, for example, agentic coding. It's like exactly the same thing that we have here, but applied to hacking, right? So for agentic coding, the recommendation is let AI run tests. Like let AI runs the code it actually codes, and it will fix its own bugs, right? Here is kind of the same thing. Instead of like asking AI for a generic shell, what you do is give it a shell and some way to confirm that it is root. Well, obviously AI knows how to use bash by now, so we kind of bind two and two together. So it's like agentic hacking, right? So at least so far, what I'm reading, this feels like what's actually applied here.
Yeah, and so this method, I want to talk about this method because I think it's pretty awesome. And I also just added to the show notes a YouTube video from Matt Brown that I shared with the team internally as well, where he's using an open source AI assisted firmware analysis tool that's fairly new called Wairz, WAIRZ, and walks you through it. And many of the techniques that you described, Vlad, are covered in that video. Now, the researchers with the Samsung TV used OpenAI's Codex, which I just started looking at today. I've mostly been using Claude Code. But I think it speaks to the larger strategy that we now have as researchers that you alluded to, Vlad. And I want to like double click on that and go into it because Matt Brown's done some amazing stuff, and I've started adopting some of his techniques. And that is, you have your command line CLI AI tool, right? Maybe you have the firmware and or the source code to the thing that you're testing. Maybe you have an actual device running somewhere on your network or running inside of emulation. Maybe you also have a UART serial connection to the device as well. And what you can do when you're doing vulnerability testing is give Claude access to all of those things, right? You're like, hey, Claude, here's the firmware, here's the source code, go unpack it, right? Or maybe you've unpacked it already by yourself, doesn't matter. By the way, you have a serial console, and Matt Brown has like a skill, and I think it's built into that tool that tells Claude how to interact with the serial console. So if you have another physical device running in a serial console, you do that. Then you're like, I also have this device running, maybe that same device you have a serial console on also is on your network, and you give Claude the IP address and the password or whatever you want to give it for it. Then armed with all three of those things, you start prompting Claude. Claude can do things. It can monitor the serial connection for the results of the thing. It can reboot it and look at the startup logs. It can do amazing things to help your vulnerability research with access to those things. Now we go back to the Samsung TV thing. That's pretty much what they did, right? So in the web browser, they gave it the command line shell. Like you're saying, Vlad, they said interact with it and then go start to find some vulnerabilities.
Yup. So like literally like without reading too deep into how they build the harness, like how I would approach this is, okay, let's give Claude a bunch of tools.
Yep.
Hey, this tool, if you pass it a command, it will run it to remote TV. And here's how you call the tool with the command, right? And just rinse, repeat. Give it enough tools and enough information about the shell, and it can do amazing things with it, even if you cannot get full SSH, like in many cases, like, for example, Claude Code natively supports, by the way, deploying itself over SSH remotely. So like you can literally run Claude Code on a remote device you're trying to exploit, given that you have an SSH bash shell, right? But if you don't, well, you can just build Claude some tools, or maybe build them with Claude. Like,
wait, so how does that work? Does Claude make a copy of itself on the remote SSH thing and reuse your API token? Is there a specific config for that?
Yup, there is a specific config for that. I'm using it right now, for example. So I'm using, like, I'm both developer and also a hacker, so I'm using kind of both use cases, development and hacking. So what I have right now is a VM to which I deployed code with like the native option to run over SSH, and Claude deployed itself. And what I followed up with, oh hey, let's deploy IDE there as well. JetBrains has the same exact option, let's deploy it over SSH. So now I have a VM which can be running anywhere. In this case, it's running in the same machine I'm working on, but it can be running remotely. Like there's nothing stopping us from this. And like I have a IDE and Claude both pointing to that exact same VM and working on the code. So like I can literally just review whatever the Claude just coded inside of IDE. And like IDE has a lot of nice static analysis tools which will not consume your tokens and can help you find mistakes.
Right.
So like you get like full experience of Claude running locally, but you run it over SSH on a remote machine. So,
Interesting. I was looking for exactly that, and I think Claude drove me in a different direction and said it couldn't do it. You're gonna have to send me what you did after the show because I'm intrigued now.
Oh yeah, I can actually show you. Like just poke me right after. Like, I'll show
Okay.
you.
It sounds good. And so, but they were able to find a vulnerability in the Samsung TV and also exploit it, right? There was a kernel module that they exploited and was able to gain through a chain and able to gain a root shell or execute commands as root. Yeah, no, it's a root shell. Yeah, on the system.
Yep. AI is really great at understanding huge chunks of code. Yeah, you need to feed it tokens, you need to feed it context, sure. But like it can understand a lot more code per second than your human brain can. So like finding a chain for the kernel is a task AI is going to be exponentially better than humans. Again, given that the Claude has data. If Claude has a compiled black box kernel, yeah, it's probably going to have problems. But if you can feed it kernel source code or decompiled kernel, like Ghidra analyzed kernel or whatever, it has a lot of data, so it can try to find stuff in there, and it's usually good at finding stuff in there.
Also, that's interesting. So you think it enumerated which Linux kernel was running on there, and then went and pulled that exact Linux source code. Yeah. So now it has the source code of the kernel, and therefore it can do the chain. Yeah.
Yep. Either that, or maybe they ran it through Ghidra or something like this.
Yep.
Because like working with black box binary is not exactly AI's forte. So
yeah, it needs a tool AI to decompile, disassemble and or decompile. Yeah, I gotcha.
Yeah, AI is not magic. Like if you don't instrument it, you're not getting anything. Like again, if AI gets a full shell like here and then it has like source code of the kernel, most likely. If not, it has some tools. They probably set up a bunch of tools. Suddenly, it's a lot better with like whatever you want it to do. Give it tools. Don't starve your AI for tools. Give it to them. Give it to AI. AI will like you for this.
I'm not sure what happened with the disclosure. They did have a GitHub where they released the source code. So you have the exploit source code. I didn't see anything in here about disclosure, though. Which is interesting. Did you guys see anything in there about disclosure?
No, I don't see
No, I didn't.
Like, there's no CVE? There's no CVE for it.
I don't see them contacting Samsung at all. Like, they didn't even mention pinging Samsung.
But the...
Did they not ping Samsung?
But this is from... Yeah, this is from Mad Bugs, which is the month of AI discovered bugs, and they've got a bunch of bugs to their credit, and they did issue CVEs for some of them. It says between now and the end of April 2026, we'll be dropping what we find in this repo and on our blog. And this is from the Califio. I saw that mentioned in the like Volncheck write-up and in a few other publications that were talking about Mythos, which is interesting, but they used OpenAI's Codex here. But I want to say that this organization or group is also has used Mythos and is mentioned in some of those publications as well. It's interesting. I just saw that recently in a Volncheck post from Patrick.
Interesting.
But interesting how they didn't work with Samsung to pull a CVE, but published a full exploit. that apparently works.
This reminds me of a recent conversation that we were having too about the Rowhammer attacks against GPUs, which was not on the docket for today, but we talked about it because we talked about it when the first set of sort of GPU hammer things came out like 6 months ago or something. And then there was a new set of like, by the way, Rowhammer style attacks work on these specific makes and models of GPUs, but there were no CVEs. And I asked the AI about it because that's what you do. And it was like, well, it's probably because it's sort of just a general class of vulnerability. It's not specific to certain makes and models, but there were specific makes and models in that new Rowhammer works on GPUs publication. It was like, why did they not? What's the sort of decision tree for whether you create a CVE? Like, is it just...
Oh, that's a loaded question. Don't ask that question of me, Chase, because then you get me up on my soapbox. Because if there is a vulnerability in a software or firmware product, it should have a CVE.
Well, that'll be
which is crazy
into our increased volume
I know.
of CVEs.
But what's also crazy about that is there are some things that do not fit that definition, like the XZ backdoor, that we've issued CVEs for. But then there's like straight up vulnerabilities where we haven't issued any CVEs. I'm like, what is happening?
Yeah, and not a super well defined kind of a fuzzy container. But like in the case of this one, the Codex hacking the TV, and also in the case of the newest GPU Rowhammer attacks, like why? You had to speculate on why they didn't issue a CVE for that. Like, why is it? They just didn't want to do the work. They're not a CMA. They don't. What is?
There is also another big question to ask. They mentioned that they already have a shell inside of the browser. How does that work? Like, there is probably yet another vulnerability they're not talking about, which lets them get a shell.
Yeah, how did they get a shell? I was wondering that too, because I have Samsung TVs, and I've not seen a shell inside of the browser.
Yep.
It's a great point.
There is a vulnerability that they didn't quite describe. It might
I
be
see.
exploit though.
That's not a feature. That's a vulnerability. It said we already had code execution inside the browser's application's own security context on the TV. Which meant the task was not to get code execution, but turn the browser app code execution into root. So this was escalation of privilege, not popping a shell. I gotcha.
Yep.
Hence the kernel modules, which is a prime source for privilege escalation.
Yup, and in this case also, like AI popping a shell initially with a black box device like a Samsung TV is actually a lot harder for AI than any kind of escape.
Yeah.
Again, because data.
So maybe that's why they released this, because it's useless to you unless you already have code execution inside the browser's application, which they did not disclose any details about. That's how they're able to do it.
Yep. And we need to dig through their publication, because why not? Maybe it's actually in there. We just don't know.
Yeah. So
that's fun.
Khalif, it says Khalif is a security firm from California trying to keep the internet together by occasionally taking it apart. And I wasn't familiar with this organization before. Again, I started seeing it in various publications related to AI, in AI specifically finding bugs. So
Yep.
Interesting. Oh, I see. They have a proper website too. Yeah. I was looking at this the other day. This is definitely the same place. And I think they are using Mythos. I think that's what Volenchek was saying, is they use other things, but they do also have Mythos. There was also a great presentation today from the SANS Institute, completely free. Josh Wright, Chris Elgie, and Ed Scotus, three extremely brilliant security folks, were talking about Mythos, and Chris gave a great demo about finding vulnerabilities in source code using AI assistants, AI coding assistants. And it was pretty great. It was basically like they're doing the same thing that Khalif, I'm going to call it Khalif, I don't know how you pronounce it, but they're doing the similar kind of thing, right? Which, I mean, many of us have made that transition or making that transition into the tool of choice is an AI to help you find vulnerabilities. But again, like you're saying, Vlad, it's not magic. You have to do. I like the word instrumentation because it's tempting to use the word training, but that's not. Training is a different thing in this context. You're not training a model. Model's already trained.
Yeah.
You're just giving it context. Yeah.
You're just letting the model run wild. And in this case, like tools, like they call it tools, like in Claude code, and basically every I have seen, they call these tools, like, or agentic coding, or in this case, agentic hacking.
Yeah.
Like,
but I also heard someone saying that
AI tools.
Like when you're developing code using AI, you should be very prescriptive and tell it like which libraries to use. And that speaks to our instrumentation point. I like to tell it which tools, libraries, and techniques to use. And sometimes I'll send it off to the internet. I'll like, go on the internet and tell me what tools and techniques exist for this, and then let me pick which one. And then you can even ask it. Like I did this the other day with, I was instrumenting libvirt, and there's a Python library for it. And I was like, wait, how well maintained is that Python library? And it was like, it's pretty well maintained, right? It does all the things, looks at the GitHub and all the things. It's like, it's pretty well maintained, and it gave me like a lot of data about it. I was like, I want to use that. Like, let's use that rather than trying to call the shell to verb sh to do what I was doing. So to your point, Vlad, instrumentation is crucial to doing this.
Yeah, to be honest, like what I do with specifically coding is like instead of giving AI raw source code, I'm actually writing a document which describes to AI how it can run tests, how it can install stuff, how like what instructions should it follow. Like for example, PyLint must not report any extra errors when you finish, right? Or MyPy should not report any typing errors because that's hidden bugs, right? So like let AI use stupid tools that will fix its bugs instead of like spending your tokens because it's cheaper. It's also easier for the developer to validate. And then instead of just sending AI off to make your code, switch to plan mode. Like Claude Code has plan mode.
Love
so
plan
like
mode.
What I do is like instead of describing it like which libraries to use, which architecture to implement, I would often just query it about, oh hey, I want this feature, come up with a plan. Then I look at the plan. If I like it, I just approve it. If I don't like it, I start to discuss it with Claude.
Yes, I do the same thing. I have the same conversations with Claude. Claude and I discuss our plans all the time. I'm like, no, I don't like that plan. Like, redo the plan using X, Y, and Z. And then I'm like, all right, I like this plan better. Let's go with this plan. Go do it.
Yeah, and also don't forget that it's not a magic automatic coding tool that will code everything for you. So what I do is, like, for production code, I read every single line it produces.
Yeah.
Because, like, for one-off tools, it worked, it solved your problem, you're gonna solve it out. Sure, forget about it. But if the code is going to production, read every single line. It sometimes does produce surprises. It's not
100%.
Which solves everything.
Right. Sometimes you can notice it getting stuck or going in a different direction, and I try and catch it, and I like quickly hit my escape key. I'm like, no, wait. It seems like you're struggling with this. Rather than doing that, like do this, or like describe like why are you stuck and why are you going in this direction. So you have to. I've found constantly refocus it. Typically, I mean sometimes it does, but typically it doesn't just go off and do the right thing automatically all the time. You can go do something else. But I mean, occasionally it does that, but a lot of times you're refocusing it to get around a problem or issue or make a design decision while it's coding.
Yep. And what else do we have on our agenda today?
It's a good. I don't think we had. Well, I talked about Matt Brown. I have not looked at this tool yet, other than just looking at the GitHub for it. But the tool wears. I'm going to open this now, and then the YouTube video is going to start to play and make noise. I apologize about that. But this is WAIRZ.ai. And the tagline reads, "Where's every firmware has secrets, Where's finds them." So it's an AI-assisted firmware reverse engineering and security assessment platform. powered by AI. It works with Claude Code and a bunch of other things. And Matt Brown gave a great video tutorial. I put that in the show notes. Matt was using it to discover some vulnerabilities in something, and a couple of things stood out. Two things. One, it has this component level analysis. So you bring up wares, you drop your firmware in like the browser interface it gives you, the web app it gives you, and it goes and unpacks the firmware, right? Which is great. Then you do component analysis, and it gives you like that brain tree graph thing and shows you the entire file system and which scripts are calling which things, which binaries are linked against which libraries, and gives you a map of all of it, which I thought was super cool. I'm like, that is super neat. Never seen that before.
That is insane.
And then Matt also talks about how to instrument it so that it has those skills to interface with the UART port, which is interesting. So all of that is in this project. So something that we're going to be taking a look at. It'll create an SBOM as well. It'll do fuzzing. It'll do emulation. All the things that we've done or tried to do with firmware over the years now are becoming a lot more achievable. Like emulation is interesting. Boot firmware in QEMU, user mode or system mode in isolated containers with GDB debugging support. Historically, that has been super challenging. In fact, I've conducted interviews with people that do this and say for any given new firmware, I don't know, this was probably 5 or 7 years ago, they said this could take months to figure out how to instrument firmware to run it in emulation. I'm curious now with these newer AI tools if they are actually helping with that. I've not played with the emulation feature in Wares yet, but that sounds super interesting. I mean, Vlad, you personally also know the struggles of trying to get firmware to run in emulation. It is not easy.
it's not easy, especially if the firmware is non-standard. Like trying to get a BMC to fully run is a nightmare, especially if you don't want just the web interface to be up, but also more advanced things. Yeah. Because like it does rely on hardware. It's not easy to actually simulate all of the hardware, and suddenly you're facing the wall.
Yep. So, and you got to emulate NVRAM, which is also the sticking point too. But the hardware is more difficult.
Yep. Also, what's very, very difficult actually is that modern firmware is not just one small binary you can actually just analyze completely. It's a whole Linux file system.
Yeah, it's a whole Linux distribution and bootloader, typically all in one.
Yup, all in one. So what you're looking is a full Linux image. So even if you manage to emulate it, like let's say completely, let's say you spend like a week and somehow you have managed to run it. Now what? Like as a security researcher, you're literally faced with an insurmountable problem. Right? You have an insane number of files which you now have to dig through. What do you do about them?
Yeah.
It's not an easy question. And I can actually help with this, like even if not fully discover some of the more hardcore bugs, at least point you in the right direction.
In the right direction, yeah. Awesome. Chase, which story is really grinding your gears that we got in here that we haven't covered yet?
You know what really grinds my gears? I mean...
Lindsay Lohan. It's a Family Guy quote. I don't know.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was trying to say. Really grinds my gears. Man, I don't know. We had a couple of good potential segues. Should we talk about the CVE growth thing? That was sort of we talked about what causes you to issue a CVE or not in any given case. And it turns out that there's just been a staggering increase in the number of CVEs that was issued and enriched by the NIST NVD, database team, whatever it is.
Yeah, forcing them to have to make decisions as to what they're going to enrich and what they aren't. It turns out they're just going to focus on what's on the KEV, which is disappointing in my mind. You want my opinion on it? I think that's disappointing.
Yeah. So they said there were 42,000 CVEs enriched by NVD in 2025, which was 45% more than any prior year. So that's a huge growth trajectory,
Yeah.
45% year-over-year growth. And we've talked about this internally and presented about it externally too, that just the sheer number of CVEs, there's at every sort of tier of security research and operations, there's just a problem with the volume, where it's like we talk about vulnerability management. Okay, it's an alert cannon. You are finding out about all these vulnerabilities. You can't possibly handle them all, so you need some sort of risk scoring or some sort of prioritization, and prioritizing is hard and takes
but I want to take a stab at why we have so many more CVEs. And there's been a progression. I think the first wave is WordPress. Several companies developed tooling to discover vulnerabilities in WordPress plugins. They became CNAs early on, and if like years ago, if you looked at the data, it was highly skewed to, in fact, I presented on this at a conference like 3 years ago, and it was highly skewed because there were so many WordPress vulnerabilities. So you had to kind of like remove those first, then do some analysis if you wanted like good data. Then the next thing that happened was they enabled more CNAs. And one of the CNAs in particular is the Linux kernel. And the Linux kernel, pretty much if there's a bug in the Linux kernel, they call it a security vulnerability, and now they're issuing their own CVEs for it, which also you can go back and look at the data, has skewed the data for CVE and forced more CVEs. Then I think the next wave after that, so you added more CNAs and you added a big one with the Linux kernel. The next wave is AI, discovering bugs and reporting them, has further upticked the CVE. So now you're forcing all these new CVEs onto a system that, I agree with Jericho, was already broken and not set up to handle the volume before, and it certainly can't handle the volume now. So
AI will like literally X5 the CVE. Like, I fully expect that thanks to AI, like this move by NVIDIA is literally them just preparing not to die under the AI workload, because like discovering a vulnerability and proving that it exists became so much simpler. Even if you don't use AI for initial discovery, look at the guys who torture at a poor TV, right? It's becoming much easier to actually set up a tool which will actually go ahead and produce you a full chain to actually exploit this. Before, this needed a lot of manual effort.
Yes.
But now it's just much easier.
But what's funny is the same thing is true managing CVEs and enriching them. It's a manual effort. Why can't we use AI on the back end of CVE to help enrich the records? I mean, granted, it may hallucinate, and you've got, the same problems when we use AI for anything, right? But I believe it's like an AI almost not an arms race, but it's a leveling up. If researchers and threat actors are going to use AI to do all kinds of nefarious things, including discover way more vulnerabilities than ever before, the defenders and other organizations that are on the receiving end of that stuff and have to do something about it, we also need AI to help instrument that. So given the task of enriching the CVEs, we could use AI. Although then I think about, I've actually done that, and it works out pretty well. If you ask an AI to go score a vulnerability, it'd be an interesting test, right, to set up.
Yeah, so the problem is a lot of CVs don't have enough details for AI to reasonably score the vulnerability.
Yeah.
Like, if you want AI to be able to score the vulnerability, you must force a process where the reporter actually discloses a lot about the vulnerability. It cannot be an unspecified issue inside the method which leads to this. AI is not gonna properly score or enrich that. You need actual technical details in every single CV that you're gonna enrich with AI. As I've said, it's not magic machine. It's not gonna by itself discover vulnerability and Google information about it out of the blue if the information is just not there.
It wouldn't be hard to review, I mean, on an individual basis, if you're discovering the vulnerability, right, and you've got the source code or the vulnerability problem like described, you've got maybe an exploit or even just a scanner, a checking tool that you wrote for it to prompt the AI to go, give me a fully enriched CVE record for that. Then, as a human, like you do with production source code, Vlad, you go through every single field and just make sure you agree with it. Now we get enriched records, of course, but every field value in there is potentially debatable, especially
But
the score.
The question is not just this. Who should be doing this? Like, NVD
Right.
doing this is not a good idea because, like, NVD does not have the full context.
It doesn't have the full context. CNAs do.
The only organization who can do this is a CNA.
Mhm.
But how do you force every CNA to do this consistently? Like, it becomes the chicken and the egg problem very, very quickly.
Yeah, because a lot of the data is optional. When you're a CNA and you create a CVE record, there is a minimal requirement for what data you put in there. All of the enrichment fields are not required, which is why you'll see CVEs being issued by a CNA that it can be scored with any CVSS. I think as long as it has one of the scoring, if it's 3-1 or it's 4-0, it's up to you which one or both you want to put in there. But as long as you have one, the CPE information is not required as far as I know. Someone can correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure CPE is not required when you're filing a CVE as a CNA. Now, a lot of CNAs do put it in there, which is super helpful, by the way. And if you're a CNA, I beg you to put that in, enrich it as best you can, because it helps us when we analyze the CVE data. It helps us go find the vulnerabilities that you're publishing way more easily.
To be honest, it's also like very important to note, a lot of CPs that I see in the wild inside of NVIDIA are just not that great. Like, for example, CPs for firmware and for hardware are in many cases they present the same device in like 25 different ways. So like, even if you have scanned the device, even if you have identified the device, go ahead and match against it, and now that's one problem. Like, your CPE data is kind of useless. So like, aside from like inserting CPE, make sure that they are in a standard format. Make sure that your device can actually return this data operationally, because if not, this CPE data is de facto useless.
Yeah.
So
it's interesting too. One of the other fields that because I vibe coded a CVE vulnerability analysis tool for internal use, and right now, I don't know, maybe someday that'll change. That's above my pay grade. But one of the things I noticed with the CVE records is the resources and references section. You can put URLs in there, but then there's another column for tags. So when you put a URL in there that represents a public proof of concept exploit, you can actually tag it with exploit. Same thing, the other tags are like third-party advisory, reference, there's a whole bunch of tags. But I find, even with new CVEs being issued, the data in those fields is inconsistent. You may get a list of references and resources, but they might not have tags. And do they have the right tags? Do they have all the tags? Is it tagged correctly? So that's a problem. When it's interesting why for CNAs we shouldn't have the enrichment problem. I feel like the CNA should be enriching it. Now we can talk about the incentives, that are backwards, because the vulnerability from a CNA is it could be in our, let's say it's in our software, and we're responsible for enriching it. We're biased because it's our software, right? I think Microsoft does a good job. I think I remember talking to Lisa Olson about, and Microsoft does a really great job when they issue CVEs to have them enriched. And they're like one of the better ones at it. But again, it comes down to a resource problem, right? I think because of due to funding issues, that's why we're seeing articles like this from NIST about the enrichment efforts, because this requires resources. And they're not getting more resources, they're getting less resources, which is a shame.
Yeah, I mean, the CISA website itself has had a banner on it for like a year now that says, due to the lapse in federal funding, this website will not be actively managed, which I don't think is strictly true, because they keep adding stuff to the KEV. They added some things today. So it's not, just adding new items to the KEV count as the website being actively managed. Did they mean to take that banner down and they just didn't? Regardless, CISA has, been deprioritized, taking some hits in funding. It has not hasn't been getting treated the best lately, and I think we're feeling a little bit of the burn from that in various ways.
Yeah, but now speaking of Microsoft, it's a good transition into. I actually had two items. You had one, Chase, and I had one that I need to add in there, and that is the secure boot status that is new to Windows 11 that will give Windows users, so in the April 15th security patch update, Microsoft rolled out a new feature that will give users a secure boot status. It goes red, yellow, and green, and there's different conditions that must be met that determine that status. I want to say it definitely exists if you go to device security in your Windows settings. If you go to device security, there's a security page that gives you like some things about your TPM and other things, and in there's now a secure boot status. Two things on that, and I talked about this last night. It's interesting that in my Windows 11 VM that totally has this security update applied to it, my Linux KVM VM with Windows 11 does not have the new feature in it. And I'm not sure if that's because Secure Boot's disabled, which I would expect a red flag and a message to tell me Secure Boot is not enabled. I'm not sure it's because it's a VM and using a hypervisor, if it recognizes that and doesn't enable the feature, or I've just locked down my Windows 11. I've stripped. It's a very customized install. I used the Schneegen's Windows installer customization to generate the XML file that, when you install Windows, doesn't give you a whole bunch of stuff. You can basically strip out a whole bunch of things. So maybe I stripped out the service that gives me notifications, but I would still expect to see it in the device settings, and it's not there. The second thing is, it still shows green even if your certificates are the ones that are expiring in June. Now, maybe that'll change when June rolls around, and it'll tell you your certificate has expired. One of your certificates, I think it's a key exchange key certificate that's expiring. That's getting all the hoopla recently. So I applaud Microsoft for making an effort, however, and this is very biased because of what we do in Eclipsium, but do you want to trust Microsoft to tell you if your secure boot is configured properly? Not so sure, based on my testing so far.
I will add a little bit to this burn. Does this indicator turn red if Windows Recall is enabled or not? This is the other Microsoft feature which got a lot of flack from the security community.
Well, I don't think that would impact secure boot. I think this is just a secure boot related thing.
Yeah, I understand. I'm just joking at this point.
Yeah.
But
well, I mean, also, like, if an attacker were to get on the system, you could also just make it always show green, I'm sure, with some kind of configuration change or exploit or something. So there's that. I mean, nothing's impervious, but...
Yep. It's not perfect.
No, certainly not. And there's a lot of weird stuff with Secure Boot where I believe it could still show green, but let's say you've got a vulnerable bootloader and you haven't applied the revocation list update for it yet. Does it stay green because it's configured, it's on, but how does it know that there's a new revocation list you haven't applied? Is it actually checking that? Is it actually checking to see if you've got the latest DBX updates? I would hope so. I would hope so.
So, and then there is also the question of, like, how well does it check for vulnerable bootloaders?
Yes.
And, like, how well does it check for vulnerable drivers, which are also part of this entire schema and shenanigan.
Right.
So
that's a different subsystem in Windows to check for, well, and it doesn't necessarily check for vulnerable drivers, but there's a list, there's a block list of drivers that you can enable in Windows. Yeah.
Yup. And then does Microsoft check for that? Like, how reliable is your green status? Because, like, if you're green but you have one of the vulnerable drivers,
yep.
Green status is kind of useless.
Yep. Does it check your BIOS version? If your UEFI is vulnerable, that means Secure Boot could be completely useless, and it would still show green. But since you haven't updated your UEFI, Windows isn't checking that. Maybe on their Surface laptops they are, but
Yeah. And for Windows, that's actually not an easy thing to check for, actually, if you think about it.
yeah.
Like, Microsoft has visibility into Microsoft products. They don't have visibility into every single vendor. By the
Right.
way, that's what Eclipsium tries to do, so...
Yes. So I'm skeptical.
Shameless
Yeah.
shield plug, which is not a shameless.
I know
for a shield.
we are totally shilling our product right now, just to forewarn everyone. But it's out of genuine concern. What I don't want to see happen is the worst thing is people get a false sense of security. Like, oh, Secure Boot says green, so therefore I'm good. And doing what we do here at Eclipsium, we know that there's a lot of different configurations, options, files, and stuff to check to make sure your Secure Boot is in a good working and efficient state. And I'm not confident that green indicator is going to go through all those things.
Yup, and like, to be honest, there are a lot of vulnerabilities that you can find related to Secure Boot.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not just this one thing to check for. It's not like an easy fix.
It's speaking of
huge feature you have to develop.
And speaking of vulnerabilities, Chase, that is the one that you added to talk about some of the at least one vulnerability in the Horizon DataSys Reboot Restore bootloader that had a vulnerability that could lead to Secure Boot bypass.
This is something that was discovered by Eclipsium researchers. Shout out Stas, credited in the acknowledgement.
Yep. Stas and Mickey, I think, were both listed in the credit for this vulnerability, CVE 2026-25250.
Mm-hmm. And
I should also point out another researcher as well. So multiple researchers. So ourselves and I believe one other researcher. It was like dual reported. So multiple researchers discovered this vulnerability and reported it. And it was a variation. I believe this is the one that was a variation of another vulnerability, because that Horizon DataSys thing looks familiar. And I remember Stas saying this. It was like a variation of something else.
Yeah. There's a CVE from 2022 that also credits Mickey and Jesse from that's in the Horizon DataSys.
There was one, and I think there was another one that wasn't us. Maybe there's 3 total in this Horizon DataSys bootloader thing.
Yeah, and it's something. Honestly, this is something that we talked about on our webinar that we just got off of, Paul, too. Not related to Horizon DataSys, but the lack of cryptographic verification or validation, where there was one of the KVMs that you and Ray had done the research on that was like not doing any sort of rigorous validation that the firmware was what it should be. And so someone could compromise the CDN and deliver whatever they wanted for the firmware. This is not exactly that, but the CWE that's assigned to this CVE, if we want to get back into it being complicated and fuzzy categories, the CWE is missing cryptographic step. And I think the situation is you can basically it would allow an unauthorized attacker to bypass a security feature locally. I think that you can like BYO bootloader and it won't verify it.
Or a component, typically, and this is a shared characteristic of many of these types of vulnerabilities, and many that Mickey and Jesse have found in the past, is the bootloader, as an example, that's signed calls out to something. Maybe it's a configuration file like it was with Grub. Maybe it calls some other binary and or program, and that program is not cryptographically signed. So as an attacker, if I can give it my own thing that it calls, whether it's a programmed or whether that's like a NSH script, is NSH script, is that the one that will run in EFI? Is it script? Did I get the extension right? But it calls out scripts, and so a lot of times, the bootloader signed, cryptographically verified, but it's calling out to something that can be controlled by an attacker that's not signed. Therefore, I can influence the boot flow in that scenario.
So, if we zoom it out a little bit, we've talked about 2 secure boot situations. Okay. Our researcher is talking about it allows loading of arbitrary UEFI drivers from the EFI system partition.
Yeah. So we
it
can
out.
call it to another driver that's not signed. Yeah, it's very typical. SMM breakouts are historically very similar technique.
Yeah. So we've talked about two different secure boot situations going on here, but it kind of seems like, and it's been years in the making, that this secure boot update that's going to introduce a lot of challenges for anybody who's got Windows 10 and 11 or is migrating Windows 10 to 11. It seems like secure boot keeps getting more and more complicated for anybody who has to administrate a system with any number of devices that have this secure boot standard in them. Like, at what point is the juice not worth the squeeze for secure boot, or this type of a security? Like, it seems like you have to have it, but it's really going to cause a lot of problems for people who don't have the bandwidth to effectively administer and deal with this increasing complexity and number of vulnerabilities in it. Like, what's gonna happen?
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to dismiss. Well, there's a lot of people that do dismiss secure boot as an effective security control. And I'm of the opinion, just because something has vulnerabilities or flaws doesn't mean we throw it away.
Sure, wouldn't suggest that at all. But like, how do we get?
But it has to be
a sustainable situation with it.
You got one, you got to make sure it's properly configured, and then two, which is the harder thing, is you have to keep up with things like revocation lists, and you have to scrutinize all the software that is signed on an ongoing basis to make sure that it doesn't have vulnerabilities. And that's those are the harder things to do. Revocation is hard.
Yeah, the problem is like that secure boot is currently a boolean. It's either true or false, and that's the mistake.
Interesting. You think there should be different levels of secure boot?
Different levels of secure boot. Like, it's enabled is level 0. Like, it's enabled and has fresh revocation lists is level 1. It's enabled, has fresh revocation lists and has controls against vulnerable drivers. That's level 2. And like, you should have at least different levels. Again, I'm just throwing out like levels, like I'm a authority here. Somebody has to standardize those and think about them properly, and not like in a 5-minute conversation like we have here. But we should have something like this, either levels or extra properties like secure boot dot vulnerable drivers, true, false.
Yeah,
like,
that's interesting. It could be a risk score, kind of like when the FCC certifies a vendor as okay to sell routers here in the U.S. based on things we don't know, which is astonishing. So it came out as Ars Technica articles where I think most of us picked it up. And Netgear, it says in the article, Netgear is the first major vendor of consumer routers to obtain an exemption from the U.S. government's sweeping ban on foreign-made routers. Now, Netgear, much like 99.9% of all router manufacturers their stuff comes from China, right? It comes from Taiwan. The components, the assembly, everything. In that was kind of unclear as to, is it where the chips are made? Is it where it's assembled? We don't have clear guidance on that. But Netgear's, they announced an exemption for Netgear's Nighthawk and Orbi routers and its cable gateways and modems. And we don't know what led to. Does that mean Netgear makes secure stuff? I can say we talked about this on the show in the past. Netgear does have a public bug bounty for its firmware on supported devices. And they're one of the few, well, I think more do now, but the last time I looked, they were one of the few that actually had a public bug bounty program. They're actually using Bugcrowd for that, which is interesting. And this is, but the exemption only goes until October 1st, 2027, at which time they will have to submit a renewal for that. So they're putting a lot more work on companies that sell consumer routers. They're still kind of ignoring the enterprise routers, which, as we know, don't contain any vulnerabilities. right? There's not a new vulnerability in an enterprise router, firewall, VPN gateway ever.
Yeah, enterprise firewalls, they have not seen a single CVE for those guys. What are you talking about? Which vulnerability sends them? It's on the consumer ones that are bad. Okay.
They also haven't really
not laugh.
and they haven't really like addressed the when you issue new firmware to it. Like, are they going to let them issue new firmware to it? That's completely backwards from a security standpoint. If a manufacturer wants to release firmware because they're fixing vulnerabilities, we 100% need to allow that, which is silly. And then the article also talks about, I think one of the most concerning things for me, I mean, it talks about drones and similar regulations. It kind of got off topic there in my mind, but they're not going to be able to approve everyone fast enough, right? Like, what is the approval process and what is your capacity to handle all of the manufacturers that are going to be submitting requests?
They're only not going to be able to approve them fast enough if they do some sort of an approval process. Whereas if, who knows what Netgear went through, but that was pretty fast.
Yeah.
So if you can also just do whatever you want because the process itself is also subject to sort of variable levels of execution, depending on
right,
traits that are not visible to the public, they could just rubber stamp as many as they want. But yeah, the stated justification for the router ban in the first place was that small office and home office routers had been involved in Volt Typhoon, Salt Typhoon, and Flax Typhoon, which were major nation-state driven APT campaigns that targeted U.S. critical infrastructure and international critical infrastructure. So Salt Typhoon was heavily focused on telecommunications companies, which is a critical infrastructure category. Others were focused more on power, water, utilities, and whatnot. But the involvement of the small office and home office, like consumer routers, was essentially that they got co-opted into botnets that were used as like a staging area to launch DDoS attacks or, to launch other attacks. I read that I forget which one of those campaigns it was, I think Flax Typhoon, the average amount of time that any given individual router spent in the botnet was like 17 days or something. So they're just churning through
it. Yep.
And I don't know, it seems like we talk about the enterprise firewalls and routers and stuff. There's been many not executive orders, what do they call that? Binding operational directives issued, and CISA executive, what is it called? EDs, whatever, that have stated that for government agencies, they're required to patch or update or retire within a very short amount of time, sometimes like 48 hours, known vulnerable enterprise devices. So that's a mechanic that they have for addressing those vulnerabilities and known exploited vulnerabilities in enterprise gear that goes kind of right to the core of it. It's like, we know that this particular vendor, this make and model is vulnerable to this thing, so you have to update it or blockade it, get mitigating controls, compensating controls in place, or unplug it within 72 hours. So for this router ban to be like, and in order to prevent small office and consumer routers from being used against us by our nation state enemies, we are going to disallow the import of new ones, but the existing ones that are already in the botnet are still okay. It's like
it's so backwards.
A radically different mechanism that doesn't seem like the way that you would do it, and we know that they know how to address vulnerabilities in different ways because they're constantly issuing these binding operational directives. So it's like, some stinks about it.
Well, also, the vendors would have to. You don't just get approval as a vendor or manufacturer. Each one of your products has to be authorized, which means and we all know how many different models and makes all of these companies have. It's staggering. Yep. So they've got 10 new models. Each one of those has to, they have to seek approval for each one.
That's why Netgear Nighthawk got approved. Looks cool, sounds cool.
Sounds cool.
Router. Just like
it is a very cool router.
That thing's,
I had a Netgear one.
Yeah, they're sweet.
Nighthawk.
Yeah, looks like a stealth bomber. Looks like a
Yeah.
jet.
Yeah,
Yeah.
the problem with the directive is that they cannot really go ahead and just ban the whole. How do I tell it? Like they cannot just ban consumers from using it. Like, okay, let's say they come up with such a ban. How do they enforce it across every single person in the U.S.? What do they replace it with? Like, it's not as simple as like a binding directive for government or for large enterprises who can actually afford and must comply. The users are not gonna spend hard-earned $500 on a new router because the government told so. It's just
Right.
not a thing.
It's
doesn't work that
crazy.
way.
It's crazy. We'll see how it all pans out. I'm sure it won't be the last time we're talking about the FCC router ban here on the show. I want to thank Chase and Vlad for participating today. Thank you, everyone, for listening and watching this episode of Below the Surface. We'll see you next time.